The dawn of September 9th, 1943, found Field Marshal Albert Kesselring at his headquarters in Frascati near Rome, receiving urgent reports from German observation posts along the Salerno coastline, documenting the largest Allied amphibious assault yet attempted in the Mediterranean theater. The intelligence described hundreds of ships offshore, landing craft approaching beaches south of Naples, paratroop drops inland, and naval gunfire preparation of unprecedented intensity. The German commander-in-chief south, who had anticipated Allied landings somewhere on the Italian mainland following the successful Sicily invasion, who had positioned mobile reserves to respond to multiple possible landing sites, who had prepared defensive plans for every likely beach from Naples to Calabria, was learning that his assessment of Allied intentions had been accurate and that the battle for southern Italy would be decided at Salerno in the coming days. Yet the recognition brought both vindication and crisis. Vindication that his strategic judgment had been correct against those who had expected landings farther north. Crisis because German forces now faced the operational challenge of destroying Allied beachhead before it could be reinforced and expanded into breakthrough, threatening the entire German position in southern Italy. The strategic context that shaped German response to the Salerno landings reflected the complex political and military situation created by Italy's surrender announcement on September 8th. Kesselring had spent the previous weeks implementing contingency plans for disarming Italian forces and occupying positions that Italian units had held, transforming nominal allies into prisoners while simultaneously preparing to meet Allied invasion. The surrender announcement had come just hours before the Salerno landings began, creating tactical confusion as German units executed occupation operations against Italian forces while also rushing to defensive positions along threatened coasts. The timing suggested Allied coordination between the surrender announcement and the invasion, maximizing disruption to German defensive preparations. General Heinrich von Vietinghoff, commanding the German 10th Army, responsible for southern Italy, had received initial reports of the Salerno landings at dawn and had immediately ordered mobile reserves to move toward the threatened sector. Vietinghoff's headquarters near Salerno gave him proximity to the battlefield, but also exposed him to potential Allied exploitation if beachhead expanded rapidly. The general's initial assessment was that Allied landing force represented major effort rather than diversionary operation, that defeating this landing was critical to maintaining German position in southern Italy, that failure to contain the beachhead would force German withdrawal from Naples and possibly from all of southern Italy. The intelligence that reached Kesselring and Vietinghoff through the morning of September 9th documented the scale of Allied commitment. The reports described American forces landing on beaches south of Salerno, British forces landing north of the town, airborne operations to secure mountain passes inland. The size of the Allied fleet offshore suggested an invasion force of division strength at minimum, possibly corps strength if additional troops were still being landed. The naval gunfire support exceeded anything German forces in Italy had previously experienced, with battleships and cruisers firing broadsides that devastated German coastal defensive positions. General Rudolf Sieckenius, commanding the 16th Panzer Division that was closest reserve formation to Salerno, received orders to move immediately to the beachhead area and to attack Allied forces before they could consolidate positions and expand inland. Sieckenius understood that the division would be attacking Allied beachhead supported by overwhelming naval firepower, that the tactical situation favored defenders who could call on ship guns to destroy any German counterattack, that his division's tanks would be vulnerable to naval shells against which armor provided no protection. Yet the strategic importance of preventing Allied breakout from the beachhead meant that risks had to be accepted. The initial German counterattacks on September 9th and 10th achieved limited tactical success in halting Allied advance inland, but could not drive Allied forces back into the sea. The 16th Panzer Division's attacks encountered American forces that held positions tenaciously, that were supported by accurate naval gunfire that destroyed German armor concentrations, that demonstrated the tactical advantages that attackers possessed when defending beachheads with overwhelming fire support. Sieckenius reported to Vietinghoff that his division was inflicting casualties and preventing Allied breakout, but lacked the strength to eliminate the beachhead. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding German forces in northern Italy, received reports about the Salerno landings and recognized that they validated Kesselring's assessment of Allied strategy while creating opportunity for decisive German response. Rommel had advocated for defending northern Italy while ceding the south to the Allies, arguing that terrain in the north favored defense and that German forces were insufficient to hold all of Italy. The Salerno landing provided opportunity to demonstrate that Allied forces could be defeated at the water's edge, that amphibious operations were vulnerable to determined counterattack, that German forces could successfully defend Italian peninsula if properly positioned and employed. The September 10th to 12th crisis at Salerno, when German counterattacks came close to splitting the Allied beachhead and driving to the coast, represented the moment when German generals recognized that opportunity existed to achieve major victory. General Hermann Balck, whose 14th Panzer Corps controlled German forces attacking the beachhead, coordinated assaults that penetrated deeply into Allied positions, that created genuine crisis in Allied command, that suggested complete tactical success might be achievable. Balck reported to Vietinghoff that German forces were achieving breakthrough, that Allied resistance was weakening under sustained pressure, that commitment of additional reserves might enable destruction of the beachhead. The specific tactical situation on September 12th to 13th brought German forces within kilometers of splitting the Allied beachhead into separate American and British sectors. The corridor between American 6th Corps positions south of the Selle River and British 10th Corps positions north of it had narrowed to perhaps 5 kilometers under German pressure. German armor attacking through this gap encountered fierce resistance from Allied forces supported by naval gunfire. But the attacks created genuine possibility that beachhead might be split and that isolated Allied forces could be destroyed separately before reinforcements arrived. Major General Rudolf Sieckenius, whose 16th Panzer Division spearheaded the attacks toward the coast, reported on September 12th that his forward elements were approaching the sea, that Allied forces in the gap were in disorder, that one more concentrated push might achieve breakthrough. The division's attack was supported by elements of Hermann Goering Division and by concentrated artillery fire that suppressed some Allied defensive positions. The momentum suggested that German forces might achieve what Allied commanders feared most, splitting the beachhead and creating conditions where separate Allied contingents could be defeated in detail. The Allied response to the September 12th to 13th crisis involved every available asset being committed to stopping German breakthrough. Paratroop reinforcements were dropped directly into the threatened sector. Naval gunfire was concentrated with unprecedented intensity on German attack routes. Allied air power attacked German armor whenever weather permitted. The massing of Allied firepower stopped German attacks short of achieving breakthrough, but the closeness of German success created recognition on both sides that the battle's outcome had been contingent rather than certain. General Mark Clark, commanding the American Fifth Army at Salerno, had prepared evacuation plans during the height of the crisis, demonstrating how seriously Allied command viewed the German threat. The plans were never executed because Allied defensive lines held, but their existence revealed that Allied commanders recognized they faced potential disaster if German attacks succeeded. Clark's later reports to Allied command emphasized how close the beachhead had come to being overrun and validated concerns that amphibious operations against determined opposition involved substantial risk, even with overwhelming material superiority. The reinforcements that Kesselring rushed to Salerno through mid-September demonstrated the importance German command attached to defeating the landing. Elements of the Hermann Goering Panzer Division were moved from northern Italy, despite the risk this created to defensive positions there. The 26th Panzer Division was ordered towards Salerno from Calabria, where it had been engaging British 8th Army forces advancing from the south. The concentration of German armor at Salerno represented maximum effort to destroy Allied beachhead before it could be reinforced beyond German capability to eliminate it. General Fridolin von Zenger and Etterlin, commanding forces facing British landings in the northern sector of the beachhead, reported that British forces were being pushed back toward their landing beaches under German pressure, that naval gunfire was the primary factor preventing German breakthrough, that without the massive fire support from ships offshore, German forces would have already split the beachhead. Von Zenger's assessment identified the fundamental problem facing German counterattacks. Allied naval superiority provided firepower that ground forces could not match, that created defensive advantages impossible for German forces to overcome through tactical skill alone. The intelligence about Allied naval gunfire effectiveness that accumulated through the Salerno fighting documented how completely naval support dominated the tactical battlefield. German commanders described battleship shells destroying entire platoons with single salvos, cruiser fire breaking up German armor concentrations before they could close with Allied ground forces, destroyer fire supporting Allied defensive positions with accuracy and intensity that German artillery could not match. The naval gunfire represented Allied advantage that German planning had understood intellectually, but that battlefield experience made visceral. The Allies could bring overwhelming firepower to bear at any point where German forces threatened their beachhead. The September 13th to 14th reinforcement of Allied forces at Salerno marked the point where German generals recognized that the opportunity to destroy the beachhead had passed. Additional Allied divisions landed with minimal German interference. Allied positions expanded beyond immediate coastal areas. Allied breakout toward Naples became operationally feasible. Vietinghoff reported to Kesselring that German forces had fought the Allied beachhead to a standstill but lacked strength to eliminate it, that continued attacks would consume German mobile reserves without achieving decisive results, that preserving German forces for defensive operations farther north was strategically sound, even if it meant conceding tactical defeat at Salerno. Kesselring's decision on September 16th to authorize withdrawal from the immediate Salerno area represented acceptance that Allied beachhead would be maintained and expanded, that German forces could not prevent Allied advance on Naples, that defensive strategy required trading space for time rather than attempting to hold positions that could not be defended with forces available. The decision reflected Kesselring's recognition that the strategic situation had shifted from whether Allies could establish beachhead to where German forces would establish defensive lines that could be held against Allied pressure. The factors that influenced Kesselring's withdrawal decision included realistic assessment of force ratios, recognition that Allied reinforcements were arriving faster than German forces could be concentrated, understanding that continuing attacks against strengthening Allied positions would consume German mobile reserves without achieving decisive results. The Field Marshal calculated that preserving German armor for defensive operations in more favorable terrain was strategically sounder than sacrificing it in continued attempts to eliminate beachhead that was growing stronger daily. The withdrawal orders that Kesselring issued on September 16th directed that German forces disengage from immediate contact with Allied beachhead, that rearguard actions delay Allied pursuit, that mobile forces move to positions south of Naples where terrain favored defense. The orders emphasized that withdrawal should be conducted methodically rather than as precipitous retreat, that equipment should be preserved where possible, that Italian port facilities and transportation infrastructure should be destroyed to complicate Allied logistics. General von Vietinghoff's implementation of the withdrawal demonstrated professional competence in conducting difficult operation under pressure. The 10th Army disengaged from Salerno positions while maintaining unit cohesion, established successive defensive positions that forced Allied forces to conduct deliberate attacks rather than rapid pursuit, destroyed bridges and blocked roads to delay Allied advance. The execution validated German operational doctrine that emphasized tactical flexibility and skillful conduct of withdrawals as essential components of defensive warfare. The destruction of Naples harbor facilities before German withdrawal from the city represented scorched earth policy designed to delay Allied use of the port for logistics. German engineers systematically destroyed docks, cranes, warehouses, and ships in the harbor, creating devastation that would require months for Allies to repair. The destruction complicated Allied logistics and forced continued reliance on Salerno beaches for supplies, partially achieving German objective of limiting Allied operational capability even after tactical withdrawal. The operational analysis that German commanders conducted while withdrawing from Salerno identified lessons about amphibious operations and about Allied capabilities. The analysis noted that Allied beachheads supported by naval gunfire were extremely difficult to eliminate, even when German forces enjoyed local ground superiority. The concentration of Allied firepower from ships, aircraft, and ground artillery created defensive advantages that German tactics could not readily overcome. The Allied ability to reinforce and expand beachheads demonstrated logistical capabilities that exceeded German ability to concentrate forces for counterattack. The tactical reports from German units that had engaged Allied forces at Salerno documented the quality of opposition that German forces faced. American infantry demonstrated determination in defensive fighting that belied pre-war German assumptions about American military effectiveness. British forces showed the tactical competence expected from experienced formations. Both Allied contingents benefited from material advantages in artillery, air support, and naval gunfire that created operational advantages overriding any German tactical superiority at small unit level. The strategic implications of failing to destroy the Salerno beachhead extended beyond immediate loss of Naples to broader questions about defending Italy. Kesselring's strategy of defending southern Italy to keep Allied forces distant from German borders required holding positions that could absorb Allied attacks without German forces being destroyed. The Salerno experience demonstrated that German forces could contest Allied advances and exact high costs, but could not prevent Allied forces supported by overwhelming material advantages from achieving operational objectives given sufficient time and resources. The debate between Kesselring and Rommel about Italian defense strategy was affected by Salerno results. Kesselring argued that German performance at Salerno proved that southern Italy could be defended, that terrain favored defense even against materially superior attackers, that fighting in southern Italy delayed Allied advance toward German homeland. Rommel countered that German forces committed to southern Italy were being worn down through attritional fighting, that defensive lines in northern Italy would be stronger and easier to hold, that preserving German strength required trading Italian territory for time. The September 20th conference at Hitler's headquarters, where Salerno results were discussed, revealed the Führer's determination to defend every meter of Italian soil despite military logic favoring withdrawal. Hitler praised German tactical performance at Salerno, emphasized that Allied forces had been contested vigorously, insisted that similar resistance throughout Italy would delay Allied advance for months or years. The Führer's determination to defend southern Italy aligned with Kesselring's recommendations and ensured that German forces would remain committed to fighting south of Rome despite operational costs. The establishment of German defensive positions south of Rome through late September demonstrated Kesselring's strategy of defending in depth rather than attempting to hold linear positions. The defensive lines incorporated natural obstacles like rivers and mountains were organized to channel Allied advances into killing zones where German firepower could be concentrated, included prepared fallback positions to enable tactical withdrawals without operational collapse. The defensive concept reflected lessons from Salerno about Allied material advantages and about necessity of tactical flexibility within strategic framework of holding Italian territory. The Allied perspective on Salerno recognized the operation as successful despite the crisis that German counterattacks had created. Allied commanders acknowledged that German response had been more vigorous than expected, that the beachhead had been contested more effectively than Sicily landings had been, that German forces in Italy were well-led and determined opponents. The recognition influenced Allied planning for subsequent Italian operations and validated concerns that Italy campaign would be slow and costly rather than rapid advance to German borders. The casualties that both sides suffered at Salerno documented the intensity of the fighting and the costs of contested amphibious operations. German forces lost thousands of troops killed and wounded, lost tanks and equipment that could not easily be replaced in Italian theater. Allied casualties exceeded 12,000, demonstrating that amphibious operations, even with overwhelming material advantages, faced determined opposition at significant cost. The attrition rates suggested that Italian campaign would consume resources from both sides faster than strategic gains would justify. The propaganda value that both sides extracted from Salerno revealed how same events could be portrayed differently depending on perspective. German propaganda emphasized that Allied beachhead had been contained, that German counterattacks had nearly succeeded in driving Allies into the sea, that German forces had demonstrated capability to contest Allied invasions successfully. Allied propaganda focused on successful establishment of beachhead, liberation of Italian territory, continuing advance toward Rome. Each narrative contained elements of truth, but emphasized aspects that supported preferred interpretation of events. The moment when German generals learned that Allies had launched Operation Avalanche came at dawn on September 9th, when initial reports arrived documenting landings at Salerno. The learning continued through the subsequent week as intelligence revealed the scale of Allied commitment, as German counterattacks tested Allied strength, as the outcome of the battle clarified. By September 16th, when Kesselring authorized withdrawal, German command understood that Allies had successfully established major beachhead in southern Italy, that German forces had contested the landing vigorously without preventing its success, that the campaign for Italy would be determined through series of attritional battles rather than through single decisive engagement. The final assessment was that German generals learned of Operation Avalanche's launch immediately and responded rapidly with forces positioned to contest Allied landings, that German counterattacks came close to achieving tactical success but were ultimately defeated by Allied material advantages, particularly in naval gunfire, that the strategic result was Allied establishment of beachhead that would become base for continued advance northward. The learning validated Kesselring's strategic judgment about where Allies would land, demonstrated German tactical competence in contesting Allied operations, but also revealed limits of what German forces in Italy could achieve against materially superior opponents. The battle for Salerno represented neither decisive German defeat nor clear Allied victory, but rather established pattern of contested advances and fighting withdrawals that would characterize Italian campaign through 1944 and into 1945.